Hi everybody, welcome to our last PowerPoint lecture for this semester. This week we are mainly just going to do a review for the final exam, so I'm going to go over the topics that are going to be covered on the exam and the procedure for it. The final exam is not going to be cumulative. It's going to cover only what we've done since the midterm. So from the perspective of the textbook, that includes chapters 10 through 19, and those topics that we've covered are yarn processing and classification, weaving methods, knitting, finishing, dyeing, and printing. So in terms of the available resources for you in terms of preparing for the exam and using during the exam, certainly the textbook, all of the lectures, any notes that you've taken, any independent research that you've done. The only caveat, just like the midterm, is that you do have to work independently. But again, these are the topics that are going to be covered on the final.
The procedure for the final exam is very similar to the midterm. It is also an open book exam that will be taken on Canvas. It must be taken independently, and it will be available starting Friday at 8 a.m. through Wednesday at 10 p.m. Once you start, you can't stop or retake it. It's exactly like the last exam, and the format is also the same.
For the topic of yarn processing and classification, we were focusing on chapters 10 and 11 in the textbook. So that's going to be a great resource for this particular topic, in addition to the PowerPoint lecture on it. But just as a reminder, we talked about spun yarns versus filament yarns. So you need to know the difference between those two, and then additionally the types of filament yarns. You need to take a look at yarn processing methods and the variations within that, as well as fiber blends and the purposes for fiber blends. So we talked about to improve fibers and to increase certain properties and whatnot. So all of that stuff is good to be reviewing. And then in addition, you need to take a look at the yarn classifications. We looked at a couple different aspects in terms of size, length, and twist and regularity. But as far as yarn processing and classification overall, these are the main topics within that overall category that the exam is going to focus on. So this is where you should be focusing your study on this topic. The topic of weaving was covered in both chapters 12 and 13, 12 being focused on basic weaves, and then 13 focused on fancy weaves. Obviously you need to understand the difference between basic and fancy weaves, and there was a chart at the beginning of the lecture which would be a good reference as far as that goes. You also need to know the difference between warp yarns and filling yarns, and the direction those yarns are going in. As well as the different types of plain weaves that we went over in terms of characteristics and types by weight and that sort of thing, as well as the different types of fancy weaves that we talked about, and even the examples that we looked in your kit. So these are the areas to focus on for the topic of weaving. Knitting, knit fabrics, and other fabrication methods were covered in chapters 14 and 15. So we went over the basics as far as knitting goes, so you definitely need to understand the concepts related to knitting and the definitions. You also need to understand the properties of knitting versus weaving. There was that chart where we compared the two as far as comfort and aesthetics and that sort of thing, so you just need to understand the major differences and how it ultimately affects the fabric at the end of the line. You need to look at the different types of filling knits, as well as the other fabrication methods we talked about, felting, foams, and those types of things. So these are the areas of focus for the topic of knitting. If you remember from the chapters on finishing, there were tons of different types of finishes. So I would recommend just understanding where all of that information is, or creating some sort of chart or something like that, so you can use it as more of a quick reference rather than memorizing everything, because there really were just too many. But the main thing is to understand where the different types of finishes fall in terms of what you're ultimately trying to do to improve those fabrics. So, for example, in terms of aesthetic finishes, there were those that improve luster, drape, texture, and hand, and that sort of thing. So just make sure you understand the finishes that are related to aesthetics. In addition, the finishes that are related to appearance retention, those that are focused on comfort, and then those that are relate to those that relate to safety. So just know under which categories they fall in terms of what the end desired result is going to be with those fabrics. So basically just understand the various categories that all the different types of finishes fall into. And that way you can find them easier, and then to go ahead and specifically state what the different types do and kind of understand what they do within those genres. The final topic we covered that's going to be on the final is dyeing and printing, and these two topics were covered in Chapter 19. So we talked about dyeing at the different stages of the fabrication process, either at the fiber stage, the yarn stage, the fabric stage, or the end product stage. So understand the variations that can occur as a result of dyeing at these different stages. We talked about several different dyeing methods and a variety of different printing methods, such as digital printing and whatnot. So again, like I said on the last slide, obviously you can memorize everything if you want to. However, there's a lot of information here, so I would recommend just knowing where to find the information and having a good understanding of the general overreaching topics, and then you can go find detailed information quickly in the time allotted during the exam. So it might be useful to prepare some sort of study guide, as that'll help you review everything and then sort of group things however you want to do so that you can have a quick reference when you are taking the exam. So that wraps up the review for this week. If you have any questions about anything, let me know. If you have any issues technically during the exam or anything like that, just make sure to email me right away. I'll be checking pretty frequently to make sure that everything's going smoothly. But it has been, I haven't had a whole lot of interaction with you all just based on the fact that this has been an online course. But I hope you've learned a lot, and I hope you've enjoyed it to the extent that you could have. And again, just email me if anything comes up in the meantime. But good luck on the exam, and I also look forward to reading through your final projects, your project number 2s. Thank you so much, and have a great week.